The laughter cut through the grand ballroom like shards of crystal, each sneer from the Crosswell family another wound inflicted upon Evelyn Sterling. The blonde bride stood frozen, as they mocked her as unworthy. Completely unaware, she held the key to their $500 million future. When the insults reached their crescendo, a stranger, William Carter, a single father in a modest suit, stepped between Evelyn and her tormentors, demanding respect. In that moment, the entire power structure trembled. A wedding transformed into a public trial. One decision would destroy a dynasty and open the door to healing love. The Harrington Hotel's golden ballroom sparkled with excess that Saturday evening. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across silk-draped tables, while a string quartet played Mozart's arrangements. The scent of white lilies, imported from Ecuador at $15,000 per arrangement, mixed with the subtle notes of champagne and privilege. 400 guests occupied the vast space, their designer gowns and tailored tuxedos, creating a sea of calculated elegance. Among them sat William Carter, feeling distinctly out of place in his 5-year-old charcoal suit. At 36, he possessed the solid build of someone who worked with his hands, broad shoulders earned from years as a structural engineer on construction sites. His weathered face bore the quiet dignity of a man who had learned to navigate loss with grace. He'd only attended because Marcus, his friend from the hotel's maintenance crew, had secured him an invitation to what promised to be the social event of the season. Beside William, his 7-year-old daughter Audrey fidgeted with a paper napkin, her small fingers already beginning the familiar folds of origami. She had her late mother's bright intelligence and her father's steady temperament, a combination that made her seem older than her years. Her Sunday dress, powder blue with tiny daisies, had been purchased second-hand but pressed with meticulous care. She looked up at her father with eyes that missed nothing, already sensing the undercurrent of tension that ran through the elaborate celebration like a fault line waiting to crack. At the head table, Evelyn Sterling embodied everything the Crosswell family claimed to value, yet secretly resented. At 28, she possessed the kind of refined beauty that came not from artifice, but from genuine confidence at least, the confidence she usually carried. Tonight, that armor showed cracks. Her Wharton MBA and position as vice president of Sterling Global meant nothing to the woman seated beside the groom, Constance Crosswell. 58 years of calculated cruelty, wrapped in Chanel, had spent the entire reception thus far, making pointed observations about new money and appropriate bloodlines. Her son Clinton, the groom, sat silent as always, his 33 years having taught him that opposing his mother meant consequences he lacked the courage to face. The public humiliation began during what should have been the toast. Constance rose with her champagne flute, her smile as sharp as the diamonds at her throat. "We welcome Evelyn to our family," she began, her tone suggesting the opposite. "Though, of course, she'll never truly be a Crosswell. Some things, after all, cannot be bought or inherited. They must be bred." The pause that followed felt infinite. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. The string quartet's bows hesitated mid-stroke. Ronnie Crosswell, Clinton's 40-year-old cousin, laughed too loudly at his aunt's words. Built like a former athlete gone to seed, he thrived on these moments of familial cruelty. "Remember when Clinton dated that senator's daughter?" he added, voice carrying across the ballroom. "Now that was a match. But I suppose we all must make sacrifices for business arrangements." He looked directly at Evelyn as he said it, ensuring everyone understood the implication. She was not a bride but a business merger, not a wife but an acquisition. Evelyn's fingers trembled against her champagne glass. Serena Vaughn, her maid of honor and only true ally in the room, tried to interject with a graceful redirect about the beautiful ceremony, but Constance cut her off with a gesture that brooked no opposition. "The ceremony was quaint," she said, emphasizing the last word, like an insult. Though I couldn't help but notice the Sterling family section was rather sparse. But then again, what can one expect when there's really no family legacy to speak of? Just a fortunate grandfather who struck oil at the right time. The master of ceremonies stood frozen at the microphone, his prepared notes useless in the face of this unexpected cruelty. The photographer lowered his camera, sensing perhaps that these were not moments anyone would want preserved. Even the waitstaff paused in their choreographed service, uncertain whether to continue or retreat. The very air seemed to thicken with collective discomfort and the guilty relief of those grateful not to be the target. William watched from his corner table, his jaw tightening with each cruel word. He recognized this particular brand of violence, the kind wrapped in silk gloves and delivered with a smile. His late wife Sarah had faced similar treatment from her family when she'd chosen to marry a construction worker instead of the investment banker they'd selected. He knew the way such wounds festered, how they poisoned everything they touched. Audrey looked up at him, her origami crane half finished in her small hands. "Dad, why is that lady being so mean?" she whispered. "Because some people think being cruel makes them powerful," he answered quietly, though his eyes never left the head table where Evelyn seemed to shrink with each passing moment. Constance continued her performance, each word carefully chosen for maximum damage. "We do hope Evelyn understands the responsibility she's taking on. The Crosswell name has meant something in this city for 5 generations. We've built hospitals, funded museums, shaped policy. It's a heavy burden for someone who's simply inherited wealth, rather than earned respect." The emphasis on inherited carried the clear implication Evelyn was nothing more than a lucky heir, a decorated checking account masquerading as a person worthy of their son. The breaking point came when Ronnie stood, whiskey heavy on his breath, and decided to share what he called a funny story about investigating Evelyn's background. "Had our people look into her," he slurred slightly, gesturing with his glass. "You know what we found? She actually lived in a studio apartment during graduate school." A studio? Can you imagine? Our Clinton's wife. Living like a commoner. Though I suppose that explains the lack of refinement. That's when William stood. He moved with the deliberate calm of someone who had made a decision and would see it through. His footsteps on the marble floor seemed to echo in the sudden silence his movement created. He didn't hurry, didn't storm, he simply walked with purpose toward the head table, leaving Audrey safely with Marcus. Every eye in the ballroom tracked his movement, this unknown man in an off-the-rack suit, approaching the epicenter of social power like he belonged there. "Excuse me," William's voice carried without shouting. The voice of someone used to being heard on construction sites over heavy machinery. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding about what weddings are for." Constance turned to him with the kind of look reserved for staff who had forgotten their place. "I'm sorry. Who are you exactly? I don't recall seeing your name on the guest list." "My name is William Carter," he replied, maintaining eye contact that neither challenged nor retreated. "I'm a father, and I'm someone who believes that weddings are meant to celebrate love, not to humiliate anyone." Ronnie laughed, the sound ugly and sharp. "This is a private family moment, pal. Why don't you head back to whatever table they stuck you at in the back?" William turned to face him fully. "You're right. This is a family moment, which is why I'm concerned. See, my daughter is watching this. She's 7 years old, and she's trying to understand why adults who claim to be sophisticated are acting like playground bullies." He paused, letting the comparison land. "I don't want her growing up thinking this is what power looks like, tearing someone down on what should be the happiest day of their life." The silence that followed was different from before, charged with possibility rather than discomfort. Several guests found themselves leaning forward, invested now in this unexpected confrontation. Clinton, for his part, seemed to sink further into his chair, his face flushed with either shame or wine. Possibly both. Constance recovered first, her voice dripping with condescension. "How touching. A construction worker giving us lectures on propriety. Tell me, Mr. Carter, what would you know about family legacy or social responsibility?" "I know that legacy means nothing if it's built on cruelty," William responded, his tone remaining steady. "And social responsibility starts with how we treat the person standing right next to us. Your son chose this woman to be his wife. If you can't respect that choice, at least respect the fact that hundreds of people are watching you destroy what should be a celebration." He turned to Evelyn then, his voice gentling. "Ma'am, I apologize for overstepping, but nobody deserves this. Not on their wedding day. Not on any day." Evelyn's eyes met his, and for a moment, something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, of one soul, seeing another's pain, and refusing to look away. She stood slowly, her voice barely a whisper. "I need a moment. If you'll excuse me." She moved toward the side door, her steps measured despite the trembling in her hands. Constance's voice followed her like a whip crack. "Running away? How unexpected. Though I suppose we shouldn't be surprised by a lack of backbone." William didn't think. He simply moved, positioning himself between Constance's words and Evelyn's retreat. "That's enough," he said. And this time, there was steel in his voice. "You've had your fun. You've made your point. The only thing you're accomplishing now is showing everyone here exactly who you really are." As Evelyn disappeared through the door, William turned back to the stunned wedding party. "Congratulations on the wedding," he said to Clinton, whose face had gone pale. "I hope someday you find the courage your bride just showed in walking away from this." He nodded to the room at large and walked back to his table, where Audrey waited with wide eyes and a completed paper crane in her hands. The hallway outside the ballroom was blessedly quiet, the sounds of the reception muffled by heavy doors and thick carpet. William found Evelyn standing by a window that overlooked the city lights, her wedding dress pooling around her like spilled moonlight. She wasn't crying, which somehow seemed sadder than tears. Marcus had taken Audrey for ice cream, giving William a moment to check on the bride. "I'm sorry if I made things worse," he offered, keeping a respectful distance. She turned, and up close, he could see the exhaustion beneath the perfect makeup. "You didn't. You're the first person to say what everyone was thinking." She paused, studying him. "Why did you do it? You don't even know me." William considered the question. "My wife Sarah passed 3 years ago. Cancer. But before that, she dealt with something similar from her family. They thought she was throwing her life away marrying beneath her station." He pulled out the paper crane Audrey had made earlier, one that had fallen from his pocket. "My daughter made this. She makes them when she's nervous or scared, says they can carry wishes away." Evelyn took the delicate creation, her fingers careful with its fragile folds. "What did your wife do? When her family rejected her choice?" "She chose happiness over approval," William said simply. "It wasn't easy, but she used to say that respect was the minimum requirement for love, not an optional add-on." Evelyn turned the crane over in her hands, and William noticed her phone buzzing insistently in her clutch. She pulled it out, glancing at the screen, and something shifted in her expression. A hardening. A decision being made. "That's my lawyer," she said, more to herself than to William. "There's something you should know. This wedding? It's supposed to seal a $500 million merger between Sterling Global and Crosswell Capital. The contracts are sitting in the presidential suite, waiting for signatures after the reception." William let out a low whistle. "That explains the treatment. They think they've already won. They think I'm a signature on a check," Evelyn corrected. "Constance sent an email to the board last week. I wasn't supposed to see it, but Serena forwarded it to me. She called me a walking bank account with breeding potential." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The funny thing is, they don't realize I have final veto power on the merger. My grandfather made sure of that in the corporate structure. Without my approval, there is no deal." She looked down at the paper crane again, then back through the window at the glittering city beyond. "You know what? Audrey's right. These things do carry wishes. And right now, my wish is to stop being someone else's transaction." Before William could respond, the ballroom doors burst open, and Ronnie stumbled out, clearly sent to retrieve the wayward bride. "There you are," he slurred. "Aunt Constance wants you back inside. Time to play happy families for the photographers." "Actually," Evelyn said, her voice gaining strength, "I think it's time for some honesty instead." She walked back toward the ballroom with a different bearing, entirely spine straight, shoulders back, the paper crane still clutched in her hand like a talisman. William and Ronnie followed, the latter too drunk to notice the transformation taking place. The ballroom fell silent as Evelyn re-entered. She walked directly to the stage where the band had been playing, taking the microphone with the kind of authority that made the bandleader step aside without question. The spotlight found her immediately, as if drawn to the sudden magnetism she projected. "I have an announcement," she began, her voice clear and carrying. The wedding guests turned as one. Champagne glasses frozen midway to lips. Clinton started to rise, his face flushed. "Evelyn, what are you?" "I'm calling off this wedding," she said, the words falling into the silence like stones into still water. The gasp that rippled through the crowd was audible. "As of this moment, I am no longer engaged to Clinton Croswell." Constance stood so quickly her chair toppled backward. "You cannot be serious." "The contracts, the merger," Evelyn continued, her voice gaining strength, "is also cancelled. As vice president of Sterling Global and the controlling shareholder of my family's estate, I'm officially withdrawing from all negotiations with Croswell Capital, effective immediately." She pulled out her phone, fingers moving swiftly across the screen. "I'm sending the formal withdrawal to both legal teams now. Mr. Bellamy, my attorney, will handle the details." She looked directly at Constance. "You were right about one thing. Some things can't be bought. Like dignity, like respect, like the basic human decency to treat someone as more than a commodity to be acquired." The room erupted. Photographers who had been hired to capture wedding bliss instead found themselves documenting corporate catastrophe. Several Croswell board members pulled out their phones, desperately trying to calculate the implications. Constance's carefully composed face cracked, revealing something ugly beneath. "You little fool," she hissed, advancing toward the stage. "Do you have any idea what you've just done? You've destroyed everything. The partnerships, the expansion, the opportunity to treat me like property?" Evelyn finished. "Yes, I suppose I have." She held up the paper crane. "A little girl made this tonight. A 7-year-old who understands more about kindness than anyone at that head table. Her father stood up for a complete stranger because it was the right thing to do. That's worth more than any merger." She stepped down from the stage, moving through the crowd that parted before her like a sea. When she reached William's table, she placed the crane carefully in front of Audrey, who had returned from her ice cream adventure. "Thank you," she said to the little girl, "for reminding me that we can always fold something new from the broken pieces." To William, she offered something that might have been the first genuine smile of her evening. "And thank you for showing me that courage doesn't require a pedigree." As she walked toward the exit, her wedding dress trailing behind her like a farewell, Clinton finally found his voice. "Evelyn, wait! We can discuss this. Mother didn't mean—" "Your mother meant every word," Evelyn replied without turning. "And your silence meant even more." The aftermath rippled through the New York financial world like an earthquake. Within hours, the canceled merger was trending on financial platforms, though the wedding drama itself became the real story when guests' social media posts went viral. "Bride cancels. $500 million deal at altar" became the headline that launched 1,000 think pieces about corporate marriages and personal dignity. William found himself unexpectedly thrust into the spotlight when someone identified him as the single dad who stood up to bullies. His simple Instagram account, mostly pictures of Audrey's origami creations and construction projects, gained 30,000 followers overnight. He ignored most of the attention, focusing instead on explaining to Audrey why sometimes doing the right thing made you accidentally famous. 3 days after the wedding, a message arrived through his construction company's website. It was from Evelyn, simple and direct. "I wanted to thank you properly. Would you and Audrey join me for dinner? Somewhere without chandeliers or string quartets, just regular people eating regular food." They met at a small Italian restaurant in Brooklyn, the kind with checkered tablecloths and candles stuck in wine bottles. Evelyn arrived in jeans and a sweater, looking younger and somehow more herself than she had in her wedding finery. She brought a gift for Audrey, a beautiful origami book from Japan, its pages filled with increasingly complex designs. "I've been practicing," Evelyn admitted, showing Audrey a slightly lopsided crane she'd made. "It's harder than it looks. You have to be patient," Audrey explained seriously, her small fingers guiding Evelyn's through the proper folds. "Dad says the paper remembers every crease, so you have to be careful what marks you make." William caught Evelyn's eye over his daughter's head, seeing her understand the metaphor. They talked through dinner about safer things, Audrey's school, William's current project restoring a Brooklyn brownstone, Evelyn's love of contemporary art. It felt like a first date, If first dates came with 7-year-old chaperones and the shared memory of destroying a dynasty. The Croswells are trying to spin it, Evelyn mentioned over dessert, while Audrey was absorbed in creating an origami butterfly. Constance has hired a public relations firm. They're suggesting I had a breakdown, that you were some kind of opportunist I'd hired to create drama. William shrugged. Let them. The truth has a way of outlasting spin. Serena recorded Ronnie that night, Evelyn said quietly. He was bragging in the bar afterward about how they'd planned to restructure Sterling Global after the merger. Push me out within a year. She got it all on her phone. Are you going to release it? Only if they force my hand. I'd rather move forward than stay stuck in that battle. She watched Audrey work, her face thoughtful. I'm starting something new. A foundation focused on promoting respectful business practices. No more mergers that treat people like commodities. No more deals that sacrifice dignity for dollars. Sounds like a company I'd want to work with, William said. She smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. I need someone to oversee construction for our community development projects. Someone who understands that buildings are for people, not portfolios. The offer hung between them, professional and personal possibilities intertwining. Before William could respond, Audrey looked up from her butterfly, now complete and perfect. Are you going to be Dad's friend now? She asked Evelyn with a child's directness. I'd like to be, Evelyn answered, meeting the little girl's gaze honestly. If that's okay with you, Audrey considered this seriously. Then pushed the butterfly across the table to Evelyn. Friends share, she declared, and somehow that simple gesture sealed something more binding than any corporate contract. 2 weeks later, Constance Croswell's carefully orchestrated media campaign hit an unexpected snag. The public relations firm she'd hired turned out to have an intern with a conscience and a recording app. The strategy sessions where Constance explicitly planned to destroy that gold digger and make sure she never works in this city again found their way to an investigative journalist. The recordings were damning not just the vitriol, but the casual admission of previous business partners they'd similarly destroyed. Evelyn held her own press conference the next day, not in a hotel ballroom but in the community center of a neighborhood where Sterling Global was funding renovation projects. She wore a simple business suit, and no jewelry except a small origami crane pin that Audrey had helped design. William stood in the back, present but not prominent, a steady support who didn't need spotlight. I've been asked to respond to the Croswell family's allegations, she began, speaking without notes. But I think the recordings speak for themselves. What I want to address is the larger issue, the normalization of cruelty in corporate culture. The idea that humiliation is acceptable if the profit margins are high enough. She talked about her grandfather, the oil wildcatter who'd built Sterling Global on handshake deals and kept his word even when it cost him. She talked about watching that legacy nearly get sold to people who saw her as nothing more than a means to an end. And she talked about a single father who reminded her that standing up for dignity was worth more than any deal. Sterling Global is implementing new partnership criteria, she announced. We will only work with companies that meet our standards for respectful business practices. We're calling it the Respect Clause, and it's non-negotiable. If you can't treat people with basic dignity, we don't want your money. The business press called it naive, even suicidal. But within a month, Sterling Global had received partnership inquiries from dozens of companies tired of the toxic culture that had become standard practice. The Respect Clause became a certification, then a movement. Harvard Business School wrote a case study. Ironically, Sterling Global's stock rose 15%. Clinton Croswell disappeared from public view entirely, reportedly entering therapy to deal with what he called family trauma patterns. Ronnie was quietly removed from the Croswell Capital Board after the recordings revealed some of his other activities that bordered on illegal. Constance maintained her position, but found her influence significantly diminished. The old guard still attended her parties, but the younger generation of financiers began declining her invitations. On a quiet Thursday evening, 6 months after the wedding, William was teaching Evelyn how to make an origami dragon in his Brooklyn apartment. Audrey had declared it advanced level and appointed herself as assistant instructor. The kitchen table was covered in colored paper, failed attempts, and Chinese takeout containers. It was the kind of domestic scene that felt both ordinary and precious. The tale is the hardest part, Audrey explained seriously, her small hands guiding Evelyn's through the complex fold. You have to be really precise or the whole thing falls apart. Story of my life. Evelyn laughed. But her concentration was total. She'd thrown herself into learning origami with the same intensity she'd once applied to corporate acquisitions. Her apartment now featured elaborate paper sculptures, each one marking a step in her journey from that nightmare wedding to this moment of simple contentment. William watched them work together, his daughter and this woman who'd entered their lives through such unlikely circumstances. He thought about Sarah, how she would have loved Evelyn's courage, her transformation from gilded cage to genuine freedom. He thought she would have approved of the careful way they were building something new, not rushing, letting trust fold into place with the same patience Audrey applied to her paper creations. I got an interesting call today, Evelyn mentioned, still focused on the dragon. Clinton wants to meet. Says he's been in therapy. Wants to apologize properly. Will you see him? William asked. No judgment in his voice. I think so. Not for reconciliation, just for closure. He sent a letter to the foundation, donating his trust fund to our community development projects. All of it. Constance is furious, but he's finally standing up to her. That's a lot of money, William observed. $50 million. Evelyn confirmed. He said he wanted to do something his father would have been proud of. Apparently, Clinton Sr. was nothing like Constance, but died when Clinton was young. Audrey looked up from the dragon. That's sad, she said simply. Everyone needs a dad like mine. The comment hung in the air, innocent and profound. Evelyn's eyes met William's over Audrey's head, and something passed between them. Understanding, possibility, hope. They'd been careful these 6 months, mindful of Audrey, respectful of boundaries, building friendship before allowing for anything more. But the foundation was there now, solid as the buildings William designed, intricate as the origami that had brought them together. There, Audrey declared triumphantly as Evelyn completed the final fold. The dragon stood perfect on the table, its paper wings spread in silent flight. You did it. Now you're officially ready for the exhibition. The exhibition was Audrey's idea, a charity auction of origami art to benefit the foundation's youth programs. What had started as a child's project had somehow attracted serious artists and collectors. The event would be held at a small gallery in Soho, a far cry from the Harrington Hotel's Golden Ballroom, but infinitely more meaningful. The night of the exhibition, the gallery hummed with quiet conversation and genuine appreciation. No string quartets or champagne fountains, just people who cared about art and community gathering to support both. Audrey, in a new dress chosen specifically for the occasion, stood beside her displayed pieces, earnestly explaining the symbolism of each fold to interested viewers. William and Evelyn moved through the crowd together, but not obviously coupled, still navigating the delicate balance of their evolving relationship. She'd worn the origami crane pin again, and he'd noticed, though neither commented on it. Some things didn't need words. Halfway through the evening, an unexpected guest arrived. Clinton Croswell, looking healthier than he had in years, entered quietly and stood at the back, observing. When Evelyn noticed him, she excused herself and walked over, William watching from a distance. Their conversation was brief, Clinton's posture apologetic but not groveling, Evelyn's receptive but bounded. When they shook hands at the end, it looked like two people acknowledging a shared history while accepting separate futures. Clinton spent the rest of the evening bidding generously on pieces, especially Audrey's collection, before leaving as quietly as he'd arrived. That was brave of him, William said later, as they supervised Audrey teaching origami to a group of fascinated children. He's trying, Evelyn agreed. Constance cut him off completely when he donated the money. He's working at a non-profit now, something with veteran services. I think he might actually be happy for the first time in his life. As the exhibition wound down, Audrey fell asleep in one of the gallery's soft chairs, exhausted from her evening as an artist and teacher. William gathered her carefully, her head resting on his shoulder. Evelyn walked with them to the door, the three of them moving with the natural rhythm of a unit that hadn't quite named itself yet. Thank you, Evelyn said softly. For everything. For standing up that night. for Audrey's friendship, for showing me that starting over doesn't mean starting with less. William shifted Audrey's weight gently, freeing one hand to touch Evelyn's cheek. Sarah used to say that the best things in life are like origami. They take patience, precision, and the willingness to try again when the folds don't line up quite right. Smart woman, Evelyn whispered. She would have liked you, William said. She would have loved your courage. Evelyn leaned into his hand for just a moment, then stepped back, mindful of boundaries still being navigated. Saturday? Audrey promised to teach me the Phoenix. She says it's the ultimate test. Saturday. William agreed, understanding that they were talking about more than paper birds. 1 year later, the Foundation's annual report showed remarkable success. The community development projects had not only met their goals but exceeded them, creating sustainable housing and business opportunities in 3 underserved neighborhoods. The Respect Clause had been adopted by 40 major corporations, with more joining monthly. The business press had stopped calling it naive and started calling it revolutionary. William now served as Director of Development for the Foundation, overseeing construction projects that built more than structures, they built communities. His small construction company had become a primary contractor, employing local workers and training apprentices from the neighborhoods they served. The work meant something, each building a tangible expression of the values that had brought them all together. Audrey, now 8 and even more precocious, had become the Foundation's unofficial mascot. Her origami workshops for children had evolved into a full arts program, teaching patience, precision, and the magic of transformation through paper folding. She'd also gained something else, a maternal figure who never tried to replace her mother but offered her own unique love and guidance. The relationship between William and Evelyn had unfolded with the same careful attention they brought to everything else. There'd been no dramatic declarations, no rushed intimacy, just a steady deepening of connection, trust, and eventually love. They'd been dating officially for 6 months, though Audrey insisted they'd been basically together since the dragon lesson. On the anniversary of what would have been Evelyn's wedding to Clinton, they held a different kind of celebration. Not in a golden ballroom, but in the community center of the first neighborhood they'd renovated. No designer gowns or string quartets, just neighbors gathering to celebrate what they'd built together. Children ran between the tables, while their parents shared food and stories. The walls displayed origami, created in Audrey's workshops, paper birds and dragons and flowers, transforming blank spaces into galleries of possibility. Constance Crosswell had sent a letter, surprisingly. Not an apology, exactly, but an acknowledgement. Her empire had crumbled without the sterling merger, several other partners pulling out after the recordings surfaced. She'd sold the family estate, moved to a modest apartment in Connecticut. The letter spoke of reflection, of understanding too late the cost of cruelty. She'd ended with an unexpected postscript. Your grandfather would be proud. Mine would too, I think. They were friends once, before pride poisoned everything. Evelyn read the letter to William that evening, after Audrey had gone to bed. They sat on the roof garden of his brownstone. The city lights spread before them like promises. Do you think people can really change? She asked. I think they can choose differently, William said, pulling her closer. Every moment is a chance to fold something new. She was quiet for a moment, then reached into her pocket, pulling out a small origami box she'd been working on for weeks. Inside was a simple question, written in Audrey's careful handwriting with both their knowledge. Will you be our family? It wasn't a proposal exactly. They'd agreed to wait another year for that. To be certain, Audrey was ready for such a change. But it was a declaration, a commitment to the unit they'd already become in every way that mattered. William read it, smiled, and pulled out his own piece of paper, beginning to fold. When he finished, he handed her an origami heart, one of the most complex designs in Audrey's advanced book. Inside, when unfolded, she found his answer. We already are. The morning sun found them there, planning a future that had nothing to do with mergers or acquisitions, and everything to do with the patient art of building something beautiful from simple materials and profound respect. In the distance, the city woke to its usual chaos, but in their small space, peace reigned. 3 paper cranes sat on the garden table, where they'd left them the night before. One for William, one for Evelyn, one for Audrey. The wind caught them gently, and for a moment they seemed ready to take flight, carrying wishes into a sky bright with possibility. But they stayed, held by invisible threads of choice and love. A family folded into being through patience, courage, and the revolutionary act of standing up for what was right. The Foundation's mission statement, framed now in every office and community center they'd built, carried the echo of that terrible, beautiful night when everything changed. Respect is not a luxury or an option. It is the foundation upon which all meaningful connections are built. In business, in community, in love, we choose to honor the dignity in every person, knowing that this choice transforms not just deals and contracts, but lives and futures. Below it, small but significant, sat an origami crane, reminding everyone who saw it that from broken moments, with careful hands and patient hearts, something extraordinary could be folded into existence.